what happens tomorrow is after this day, when absolutely, literally everything could possibly go wrong goes wrong, they then dust themselves down and resist and hang on for another 6 days.
Hello. On Sunday the 17th of September 1944, the 1st Airborne Division began dropping into Arnhem to begin a battle that remains iconic to this day. Within 2 days, progress was proving difficult, and on Tuesday the 19th, Black Tuesday, things came to a head. The commander, Roy Urquhart, had gone missing. His subordinates were squabbling over command. Only one battalion had made it to the objective, Arnhem Bridge, and the Paras had come up against stiff resistance in the form of SS Panzers. Continuing our Operation Market Garden special, historian and comedian Al Murray joins to talk about that most heroic of failures, the Battle of Arnhem, and focusing on one day when success or failure was decided. Links are in the show notes, and please do give a kind review if you can. Coming up on Saturday, Gordon Corrigan and Philip Lubb discuss the wider operation as a whole, and then we have A Bridge Too Far on the Film Club. Plenty more history on the way, including Henry V, the Iranian embassy siege, and much, much more. But until then, it's me talking with Al Murray on Black Tuesday. Al, it's a great pleasure to have you on. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Well, this is very exciting. I've been reading Black Tuesday, and I really enjoying it. I'm not really an aficionado of the sort of intricacies of particular battles during the Second World War, and I certainly appreciate the Duke of Wellington quote at the beginning of the book, which that was something to do with the model that's in the National Army Museum, isn't it?
Yeah.
Going off on a slight tangent there.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting that you managed to find a new way of talking about a battle that is familiar to so many. And
thank you.
Was that just through sort of walking the ground over and over and then coming across it, or talking endlessly with James Holland?
To an extent, but really it was to do with, because I did think of this before we started the podcast. It's an inkling of an idea I had about 7 or 8 years ago. But the genesis of this idea really, or the thing that made me go that when I was really mulling over how to write about the Battle of Arnhem, because I thought at some point I'm going to have to write about a battle. I'm going to have to write a military history thing, because my last book, Command, was sort of a series of essays, character studies, and digressions. Talk about Patton's rhetoric and how does that fit into the picture of the man and where they are in the war at the time and all that sort of stuff, right? And then stuff to do with mental health in that chapter. But I thought at some point I'm gonna sort of have to fix bayonets and as it were, and write about a battle. And this is the one I'm most familiar with. Although one of the things I've learned, again, and this is what always happens, the minute you start studying things, you realize, actually, I know nothing about this. I know a tiny amount. I thought I knew my way around this, and I really, really don't. So, but 20 years ago, when I was making this TV program called Road to Berlin, which was my first sort of bit of history, work outside being a comedian, we were filming in Arnhem, and we were at by the bridge on this Jeep, and I was having an argument with our producer about the program, saying, there's this battle in the woods, this confrontation in the woods that they have, and why aren't we talking about it in the program? And I said to him, well, what will happen is I'll be in a pub and some bloke will come up to me and go, you left the bit with my grandfather out in the woods, and everyone always leaves that out and all this. And we're having an argument, proper to and fro. And he's going, yeah, but Al, it's really confusing. It's really complicated. I said, yeah, it is really confusing. It's complicated. That's the reality is it's confusing and complicated. And we can explain that it's confusing and complicated, but this is all, here's something else that's happening, right? And we were really going backwards and forwards, and he was going, well, the viewers won't keep up, and all sort of dispiriting stuff. And this old boy, a veteran, comes over, because the town was full of veterans 20 years ago, comes over and goes, there you are at the bridge filming the Glory Boys here. Everyone always leaves us out. Me and my mates were cut to bits in the woods, and no one talks about us, right? And then he toddled off. And I'm like, you see, to my producer. And if you're going to write the normal Arnhem 9-day battle story, what happens in the woods is like a half of 1 day of 9. right? But it's actually, I think, one of the sort of decisive moments in the battle. It's incredibly dramatic. And it's kind of like a hallmark of the decision to do it is a hallmark of the chaos and the confusion at the heart of how they're trying to decide what to do once things have started to go wrong. And so I wanted to write a book that basically gave that the same weight as all the other bits of the battle that normally get proper weight, and that's why it's about the Tuesday, because the Tuesday starts with possibilities, ends with none, right? And we've all had days like that. And I thought, well, how do we illustrate that through the story of the Battle of Arnhem? And by only doing the one day, I was completely set free as well from the normal narrative constraints, because I want to talk about the people, because the personalities are really, really interesting, and how their personalities play into what happens is really, really, because I'm not a longue durée tectonic plate historian. I really believe in contingency. I really believe in people not knowing what's around the corner. And I mean, the analogy I'd use is that, when you're hit by a car, you don't know who's driving it. You just know you've been hit by a car. Life isn't an insurance claim. History shouldn't be like an insurance claim where you fill in the form and then you find out when it's happening to you, you don't know what's happening to you, and I wanted that to be the way the book told the story.
Yeah, you very much get that feeling when all these guys are sort of just dealing with the immediacy of what it is. And we're so used to, because of the film, you get the sort of grand strategy, which is what I kind of really loved about it, because you get all these characters coming out. I just wanted to discuss briefly the plan, because I've had a number of historians. Saul David was on his episode's coming out tomorrow when we're recording. Yeah. And Saul's sort of very much, it was worth the risk, and I'm actually beginning to come around to that, because originally I think I'd probably taken the Dickie Attenborough view that this is all a terrible waste, but actually it does seem like it was worth the risk, and particularly as Ike and Bradley agreed that it was as well, didn't they?
Ike signs off on it. There's when people want the buck to stop with Montgomery, fine, but Ike did sign off it. You wouldn't be able to do this if Ike didn't sign off on it. So you can't stage a thing like this without his nod, right? Come on, right? I'm of the view what they're trying to do, right, is end the war before Christmas, which sounds to me like a laudable aim, right? They're thinking, if we can get this damn thing over with and stop losing people and spending if we can just do this, and given the run of the green at the time, they think that's the way things are going. If you look at the situation, the campaigning in Normandy, despite its tensions and difficulties and sort of personality clashes, by the end, Paris is liberated ahead of schedule. They meant to liberate Paris within 90 days. They do it ahead of schedule. The fighting in Normandy, the German army is smashed to pieces. The here is destroyed, arguably. Then there's what they call the Great Swan, where they swan off. One of the armored divisions does 90 miles in a day. Like the German, it's a bigger and more rapid advance than the Germans achieved in May 1940, which is sort of seen as the whole, like the gold standard of the other side collapsing and all that, right? They're also all thinking through the prism of 1918. And in 1918, the Allies make strategic gains, but nothing like as dramatic as the ones that are being made in the late summer of 1944. Nothing like it. The 100 days is a sort of crumbling process as the German army retreats. And then the home front in Germany collapses. There's a revolution. The army sue for peace, right? And if you're a Allied strategist in late August, early September 1944, you're thinking, well, we've advanced far further than 1918. The army in Germany has just tried to kill Hitler. We're destroying their cities on a level that far exceeds anything we ever achieved in the First World War. Surely it's all about to fall in on itself, right? And so if you can do this thing, which also means you haven't got to fight your way through the Siegfried line, and that you can avoid having to do that, save lives or your own lives in having to do that. Well, if we can hop over these rivers and why wouldn't you roll the dice? And I think so often people just don't want to, when they look at it, and because it goes wrong inevitably, they just do not want to look at the reasons people thought it was worth a try. They can't put themselves into the mindset of the end of August 44 if you're an Allied strategist. And also the other thing is the V weapons campaign has got going just, not long after D-Day, and the V2s are falling in London by the time of Market Garden. I live in Chiswick. The first one fell half a mile from here in Staveley Road on the 8th of September. The British government and strategists dealing with the fact that June, July, August have been the bloodiest months for Britain of the war, because you've got full land campaigning in Northwest Europe. Finally, you've got things going full tilt in Burma, and you've got the V weapon blitz, the second blitz. So I would say if someone comes to you and goes, we've got this parachute army, airborne army, and we can speed things up, short circuit the war, I'd go for it. I'd go, yeah, okay, if you think that's going to work. And they're in a hurry, because why wouldn't you be in a hurry? I mean, I find it kind of inarguable, and I can completely see why they all go, we'd do it again. Worth a punt.
And the 1st Airborne Division is what, 10,000 men? So
yeah, 10 and a bit. Yeah.
I mean, that's not a vast number of people to have a go with. It's not the end of the world if they are all, which ultimately
generally go into the bag. Yeah. I mean, that's actually the thing about Arnhem is actually, kind of a lot of them are killed and a lot of them are wounded, but it's actually the fact that, 6,500, whatever it is, are captured is the taken prisoner. That's the on the balance sheet, that's the sort of issue. But yes, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, although what is happening is that the British are beginning to run out of infantry, which is another reason why they want to get things done quickly, starting to run out of infantry. And more and more, this is one of the things that's compelling the airborne people to say, yeah, we can do that. Absolutely, we can do that. Yes. Because they are, they're brand new. Parachute stuff is only 4 years old. British have only been doing it for 3 years, really, operations. And they're absolutely desperate, these Maroon Beret people, not to be basically stripped of their parachuting role, their airborne role, their glider role, turned into normal infantry, and the kind of shine go off things. And also all the training and, thinking they've done come to nothing. So yes, within the grand scheme of things, it's not too many people, but it's also, they say yes, they say we can do this because they're desperate to get on with doing something. They're supposedly elite soldiers and they've been sat around doing nothing all year, literally.
Well, let's zoom in on the 19th then, or rather, if we can just sort of go back 24 hours to the 18th.
Yeah.
Because I loved your description of the row. Now, listeners will know what I'm talking about because I talked about it briefly with Saul, but the row.
Yeah, the great row, yes.
Yeah, there's a quote early on in the chapter, beginning of the chapter. I think someone saying this most dreadful argument going on.
Oh, yeah,
Mommy and Daddy are arguing.
Yes. Do come downstairs. The brigadier's are having a terrible argument. It's one of the proper staff officers. Come down quickly. The two brigadiers are having a flaming row, and that's the assistant adjutant, quartermaster general. So he knows exactly what's going on, and we know there was a big row. And the reason we know there was a big row is because when A Bridge Too Far, the book came out, General Hackett, as he was by then, wrote to the Sunday Times and said this didn't happen at all. So it happened, right? Why did he sort of give it credit, the story at all, by rebuttal? Rebuttal is a sure sign it happened. But the row is, I think, deep reasons why it happened. The row is very simple. General Urquhart, Major General Urquhart, has gone missing. He's vanished. He's gone. They don't know if he's killed, wounded, captured. We do know now, thanks to hindsight, where he was, and thanks to him then reappearing. We do know the story of where he was. But they don't. When this happens, they have no idea. They don't know if he's dead. They don't know if he's been killed. What they do know, but they've only just discovered, is that before he gets in the glider to go to Holland, he tells his chief of staff, Charles Mackenzie, who's effectively the guy in charge in his absence, what the order of succession in the division is. And the order of succession is Gerald Lathbury, Brigadier Lathbury, who's the commanding officer of 1st Parachute Brigade, who is also missing. So he's out of the picture. Then Brigadier Hicks, who's the brigadier in charge of the Air Landing Brigade, which is the people who've come by glider, who is there, right? And has been there from the opening minutes of the battle. So if anyone's going to have a rough idea of what's going on, or a better idea of it, was him. And then Hackett, Brigadier Hackett, is 3rd in line. And Hackett has arrived in the second lift on the Monday afternoon, late. They're meant to come in the morning, they come in the afternoon. He has arrived, and he doesn't like the situation one bit. And one of the things that when he arrives, one of his battalions is taken off him, which happens. It's taken off him and sent under someone else's command or sent into the town to join the battle in the town rather than at his disposal. And he's given another battalion. He's really unhappy about that. And that decision's been made before he arrives in Arnhem, even before he's embarked in his aircraft, right? Because they know they've got to start pulling levers because things aren't working out as they planned. Anyway, he's livid about this. So at midnight on the Tuesday morning, he comes to the Hartenstein Hotel, which is where divisional headquarters is, and rocks up and goes, basically, what the hell's going on? Takes the other Brigadier Hicks into a corner of the room, and they have one of those like kind of that gradually gets louder and louder and louder and louder. Hackett is really unhappy with having a battalion taken off, and he's really unhappy with what he feels is like a sort of what he calls an untidy situation. And at one point, points out that actually he is senior to Brigadier Hicks because he was made a brigadier, promoted 2 or 3 months earlier, right? And the thing about Hackett is probably one of the cleverest men in the British Army. He can speak 10 languages. He's from Australia, so he's one of those sort of imperial centre people. It's like his father's a newspaper magnate, so he's one of those people who can move from Melbourne to London to Montreal or whatever freely because he's part of that class of people who did that. A bit like Bernard Freiberg, those people who regarded the Empire as an English, or even like Max Beaverbrook, they're like an English-speaking world person. So I've come to join the British Army. I might be Irish Australian, but I've come to join the British Army. I've gone to Oxford. He's like one of those people. And he's very, very, very clever and very sure of himself, even though he's not an infantry soldier. So he turns up, terrible argument. He then, in one account, says, well, basically, I didn't like what's going on. So I wrote myself some orders, signed them, and then went off to do what I was going to do. But this row is about what to do next with 4th Parachute Brigade, who are the fresh asset in town. In Arnhem is what the military would call it. They're the freshest assets. And it's a whole brigade of guys. And he decides, even though everything about the operation they know is 36 hours out of date, their expectations are at least 36 hours out of date. The enemy are resisting in all sorts of ways they haven't really accounted for beforehand. He decides to go with the original plan A, which is his brigade will move north of the railway line, north of Oosterbeek, north into the northern bit of Arnhem, and they'll go up to some high ground and then they'll move on. He's going to go to his phase 2 positions, even though the plan is not working. And I think he does that because he's a man of decision. He's a man of push and go. He's a thruster. And he wants to be decisive and make a decision. He doesn't want to listen to anyone. He's certainly not going to listen to a guy he doesn't think should be in charge of him because he doesn't know about the order of succession, because Urquhart only told his chief of staff. And Urquhart describes Hackett in all sorts of different ways, but the key indicator of what he thinks of Hackett is he calls him short, right? And it's like one of those 1940s, well, he's trouble with old John Hackett is he's short, right? So he's like a annoying little bloke, little man syndrome sort of thing is what's implied. And they've already had some personality clashes long before the battle. And they all view Urquhart with suspicion because he's come from outside the airborne fraternity. He's been foisted on them by Montgomery, basically to try and bring them in line, so that he's got one of his people who knows how he likes things done in place, which is the Monty way of making appointments. Anyway, this enormous row happens, and I think it's really very interesting because Hackett's decision on reflection, with hindsight, but with the day's hindsight, because how the day plays out, rather than 80 years later, how the day plays out is completely calamitous for his brigade. His decision is very peculiar, and I think he's so hot-headed and angry with how he finds things, he makes a poor decision. And because Urquhart isn't there, he's not in charge. There's literally no one in charge. And I think after the war, Hackett did write about Arnhem, but not about the battle, really, because he was injured later on. He's a phenomenally brave man, and his men love him, and they'll follow him anywhere and all that, which is part of the problem. In fact, he makes a terrible decision. They follow him anywhere. They go, yeah, all right, fine. It's sort of part of the tragedy of it. He's wounded, and then he's smuggled out by the resistance. He wins a military cross, smuggled out of the resistance, gets back to Britain in February. So, like, you can't criticize him. He's like he's an actual proper hero, right? But in his writing, he said he says Arnhem really, for those who were there, was like a spiritual experience rather than a one I'd care to talk about militarily. And I think the Battle of Arnhem is where John Hackett discovers he doesn't know everything, discovers he isn't the cleverest man in the room necessarily because of the mistakes he makes, and that, you know, for a man that confident, a man with that unshakable intellectual confidence, to realize that about himself, I think that's why he calls Arnhem like a spiritual experience. He learned everything about himself in a morning, basically.
Was that mistake? If he hadn't done that, could they have held on any longer? Because surely it would have been.
Well, you'd have had.
Is that an unanswerable? Surely
it is an unanswerable, because had they decided not to fight over the railway line, of course, the Germans would then do something north of the railway line. Germans would do something different. You know, they're not going to sit around and wait for that to happen. They're going to do something different. But it would have given, once Urquhart reappears at 7:30 in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning, once he's escaped from his, exile in the loft, he'd have had another brigade to decide what to do with. But by the time he reappears, Hackett's attack is already in motion and already going horribly wrong. So there's, and Hackett won't come and see Urquhart once Urquhart reappears, and Urquhart has to go and see him, which is quite telling about the state of play between the personalities. And actually goes to see him, and then half an hour later tells him to call things off. But you get the feeling that they're they're tiptoeing around one another a bit, and that's really interesting. And that's the sort of, you can, if you're only doing the day, you can really like try and get into what's going on there and what that all adds up to.
I don't want to dwell too much on the senior officers, but
Yeah.
Urquhart, it feels like he's sort of, when he does return, he's just feeling a little bit, I don't know, bashful, or he knows he's screwed up, basically.
Oh, he knows he's screwed up, and they're all like, "How wonderful to see you, sir." But I think he knows, this is now going to be the story of his life. That however the battle turns out, he's the bloke who vanished for 36 hours, because he's effectively away from his headquarters for 36 hours and no one knows where he is. And they do think he's dead. They do think he's dead, wounded, captured. And the rumor mill is in overdrive to the point where they think the assistant director of medical services, the chief doctor in the division, is also dead. But he's not. He's in Oosterbeek. They know where he is, right? Or they ought to. But the rumor mill, and what you want to do is credit them the rumor with its reality, that the rumor is real. The rumor is the thing they're acting on, rather than a rumor that should be discounted. It's, as far as they can tell, it's what's happening. And there are several rumors during the day that shape what's going on that also turn out to be completely untrue. And that's really interesting. But also, you've got to weight that in how they're thinking. But Urquhart's issue is he's come from outside the airborne fraternity. He's given the job that other people think they should have got. He has no airborne experience, but no one has really. They don't, it's all new still. So I always think that's like a poor criticism on their part. They're inventing it. He might as well be part of inventing it too. But what he does do, because he says, they call me a landlubber and all that, what he does do is defer to their judgment. So the plan to go into Arnhem is cooked up by Brigadier Lathbury, who is the airborne expert, and that plan is rubbish. The plan to go into Arnhem of breaking up the 3 battalions and on their separate routes and not concentrating force is really the problem on day 1 and into day 2. That on day 3 they're trying to unravel, that they're trying to compensate for, and that's Urquhart going, of course you know what you're doing. So he defers to these airborne people who think he's clueless, and their ideas turn out to be unsound too. So that's a very, if you take the fighting out of this, the sort of management questions that are going on here and the personality questions are interesting in themselves. That like New Broom comes in and is told he doesn't know what he's doing, but do the people who are established, do they really know what they're doing, or have they made it all up? And one of the interesting things is the Commander Royal Engineers, Mark Henniker, Colonel Henniker, who isn't on Market Garden, but he's the CRE for most of Urquhart's time there. He moves on. Says Urquhart came in and he didn't buy a load of our mumbo jumbo that we'd come up with, and more power to him for taking us on a lot of what we thought we knew we were doing. And that's really interesting. That's a glimpse into someone being reasonable about it rather than writing him off from the start.
Well, the other thing that I found really interesting reading the book is you've just mentioned these rumors that
Yeah.
sort of influence how the battle progresses. Reacting to these rumors, that becomes more of an acute problem, particularly with airborne fighting.
Which is so confused in its, obviously the idea is you confuse and confound the enemy because suddenly there's a 6,000 blokes in their rear and they're like, what do we do about this? Hell, where are they going? What are they doing? But that confusion on the enemy's part is particularly if you're trying to capture the bridges on the Neder Rhine, which is the last river obstacle to get into Germany. If you're going to outflank Germany, it's pretty obvious what they're there for, right? So you're going to stop them getting to the bridge. It's like, it's not hard. Although what's interesting is on the Sunday night, the Germans don't garrison Arnhem Bridge because they're so confused by what's going on. But which is how, I mean, a big part of why Frost is able to take the bridge is because the Germans don't hold it. Had they held it, garrisoned it in the first place, this would be a very different story because we wouldn't even have Frost's amazing stand at the bridge. That wouldn't have happened. So, all the what ifs have to include that as well, right? But it's such confusing fighting. And the men, I mean, I almost feel if people read this book and they're confused by some of it, fine. It's confusing. I don't mind if they go, what the hell's going on when they're reading it? Because that's what it's like. And that's what it was like. Rumors feed in, and there's all this stuff that compounds the power of rumor, which is you have no rear if you're an airborne division. If the men are running away from the front, as they see it, the thing in front of them, where's the rear? Well, there isn't one because there's Germans there as well. And there's a moment in the afternoon where there is a ripple of panic. Which, it's not to put too fine a point on it, and they all write about it. So it's not doing anyone down saying this. It happens. And the remarkable thing is they recover from this ripple of panic, which is the sort of really interesting bit. There is a ripple of panic, and the men are running back towards the drop zones and the landing zones. They're literally going back to where they came from in their minds. They're running west to get away, to go, even though there are Germans in the west, obviously, because the Germans are trying to surround the whole thing and sort of kettle it. They're going back to where they landed by parachute, which is not rational, but or maybe it is rational in that set of circumstances. So it's really, really, there's a real fragility to an airborne operation. And it's a thing Urquhart writes about, and then other people low down the food chain also in their reminiscences concur. It says you're dropped right in the middle of things. You don't know, arguably you don't know where you are. Are you even in the right place? Where is the enemy? Where's up? Where's down? All that. And that then means the men some of the men can be more brittle in terms of when things start going wrong, how they react to that. And after all, loads of people have gone there thinking war's nearly over. We're going to win this easily. A lot of them have got that impression. And so I think if you start the morning thinking, hey, the war's nearly over, we're going to win this. And then you realize that you're not. I think the mental flip that must go on. I mean, I've never experienced anything like the peril these guys endured. So all of this judgment has to be like kind of qualified by admitting that. But I mean, yeah, the airborne warfare is in its very nature confusing, and confounding for everyone involved. And then
you get street, urban fighting as well, which makes it even more intense,
which is incredibly confusing. And we went on a battlefield tour there 2 years ago. Jim and I, we walked some people through the town and walked around all the sites and everything and talked about it. And we walked from the two-para rendezvous at Renkum and walked all the way to the bridge. And basically, the first bit is countryside, woods, roads with fences, and all that sort of stuff. And then you go through the first little bit of built-up area and you think, oh, right, okay. And then once you get under the Easterbeek railway bridge and you're into the town, I was really struck by this because looking at maps will never tell you this. First of all, Arnhem is not flat. It might be in Holland, but it is not flat. It's ridges and hills and embankments. So the ground is immediately working against you. And then the built-up areas are like warrens, where once the houses start, and you think, these are battalions that have generally trained to advance on mile-wide fronts on Salisbury Plain. And suddenly they're in streets, and streets offer this very, very confusing and complex battle space that's also three-dimensional, because someone could be in a room 2 stories up looking down on you. Like everything about it is difficult. It's all difficult. You could and the Allies in Normandy in flattened Col in order not to have to fight through it, street fight through it. They destroy the place because that they think that'll be easier than trying to street fight through it. And the wisdom of that decision, I don't know. That's for people to argue about. But in Arnhem, the minute you see the streets, you can see why 4 battalions are sucked into the town and basically either in the process of being written down disappear. The men disappear. They vanish. Everyone's in a different house. Everyone's in a different room. And also you've got to clear every house, every room in every house. You have to clear to make sure the Germans aren't there. It's basically impossible. The battle that they then try and fight, because of the built-up area.
And these are SS Panzer troops. How much?
Some of them.
Right. Okay. And what's the kind of view of them, of their opponents? Or are they just sort of dealing with firing back from incoming fire?
Well, what happens is the Germans immediately figure out what's going on, right? And reinforce like mad. And I think it's 9th SS Panzer Division, 9th and 10th SS Panzer are in town, are in Arnhem, in the vicinity. And I think it's 9th. Their vehicles are literally on railway trucks about to be shipped to Germany, right? They're leaving. They're getting ready to leave. And obviously, they then don't leave. And they've been written down in Normandy. So they're like skeleton crews, but they've still got armoured fighting. They've still got panzers. So they've got enough to hold up airborne soldiers. Particularly airborne soldiers who are trying to attack or advance. Airborne soldiers, once they're dug in and set up, it's they're as difficult to remove as anybody could ever be. But they're not really designed for assaults. They haven't got the heavy metal, basically. And the German reaction is to feed absolutely everyone they can get their hands on into the battle. And it's run by the SS, by the Waffen SS, the battle, but it's not necessarily fought by them. So you've got recruit training, NCO trainings, school people, you've got kids, you've got Kriegsmarine, naval personnel, you've got Luftwaffe clerks who are taken off airfields and given rifles and told, right, off you go. And they've not been infantry trained. And the German attitude to the life of their men is cavalier at best.
Yes, I was reading in the medical side of things. It's unbelievable. They kind of write them off.
Yeah, they think, well, a man who's had a stomach wound is not going to be any use to anyone ever again, so we might as well euthanize him. And that's like, so that's their medics think that. So what their infantry commanders think is, we're just going to pump blokes into this suburb, and if they're all killed, it doesn't matter as long as they're holding the British up and preventing the British get to the bridge in good order. It doesn't matter how many people die. And because I mean, in the book, I don't talk about the German side at all. They're just the Germans, the enemy. We don't talk about decisions. We don't talk about anything, right? Because that's the experience. But when you look at the casualty figures for the Germans, there's a brilliant book by a man called Bob Kershaw called "It Never Snows in September," which is like the one of the most groundbreaking Arnhem books, because it's just all from the German perspective. He says basically, you've got all the German casualty figures, you just have to double them. They're wrong. They're wrong by the order of, they're 50% of the figures, really. Just double them. Whatever the numbers the Germans have in their tally, double it, because they don't care. What they care about is stopping the British getting to or holding the bridge, and any which way. And the German problem is they're fighting a very determined opposition. So the British are really making it count. But as long as they're holding them up, it doesn't matter. And I'm kind of reminded a little, it reminds me a little of sort of Afghanistan, where we sent our best people, extremely well equipped, sort of compared to their Afghan opponents, sci-fi sort of outfit, with drones and all this sort of stuff. But a bloke who's determined to die for his cause with an automatic weapon can hold up everyone in their body armor and with all the latest kit. They can hold up the best soldiers in the world, the best equipped soldiers in the world, if that's what they are, because that's all he's got to do. He's just got to shoot at them, and he doesn't care about himself in the same way, in the same way they care about themselves. And that's, a Western army wouldn't have been able to react to Arnhem the way the Germans do, because they'd have been worried about casualties. Whereas the Germans are like, off you go, die for the fatherland. Well done, everyone. It's and that's a big characteristic of the German side of the fighting in Market Garden.
Another thing that I hadn't, I guess, appreciated, despite having read, I did actually read the Cornelius Ryan back in the early 90s. I wondered what your view of. Yeah, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. But
compelling author, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, but the construct of an airborne battalion with all the different parts. I mean, there's a chapter on, or a passage on the artillery involved.
Yeah.
I didn't realize I would get sucked into being interested about 6-pounders and 25. But they had 6-pounders there, which
they had the 6-pounder anti-tank gun and the 17-pounder anti-tank gun. And the 6-pounder is the standard British weapon. The Americans copy it. It's a 57mm anti-tank weapon.
And that can actually knock out a Tiger tank.
That can knock out, close enough, it can knock out anything the Germans have to offer, because they've got this. I mean, I have a friend who's an artillery expert, and he always says, ow, the gun isn't the weapon. Come on, Al. You know this by now. The projectile is the weapon. The gun is the delivery system. It's the round is the weapon. Come on, how many times have I got to explain this to you, right? And the British are really, really good at this, and they develop a thing called a discarding sabot round, which is basically a dart, a tungsten dart that's in a sort of sabot, like a clog, literally, in a plastic casing. And when it fires from the gun, it discards the casing, and then the tiny tungsten dart, which is very heavy and hard, flies faster than if you fired a normal hardened steel tip shell. A discarding sabot round, and that at the right range can destroy anything the Germans have to offer. And so they've got that, but what's apparent is they haven't really trained on it very much, because they all complain about the ammunition. They all complain about it, and it's in the Commander Royal Engineers report. He goes, the men didn't like the round, and then one of the gunners, because what you always want is you want the official report, and then you want corroboration from the and one of the gunners is going, we didn't like it, we couldn't work out, because they see the sabot, the casing fall, and they think that's the fall of shot, and they get confused, right? Which all that tells you is they haven't trained with it enough. That's it. That's what that tells you. It doesn't tell you that the ammunition's rubbish, because it can destroy anything. And then they bring but the good thing about the 6-pounder is 4 blokes can pick it up and run it around and drag it out onto the street and fire it and then drag it back into cover. And they also bring the 17-pounder with them, which weighs twice as much as the 6-pounder. You can't do any of those things with it. And obviously that requires a much bigger glider. So bringing those bigger weapons to Arnhem is like an opportunity cost. And that you can't fill that glider with something else if you're bringing those 17-pounders. If the glider with a 17-pounder, for instance, lands upside down, you can't get the damn thing out of it. And they're not fighting at the ranges they need that gun for. And there's one 17-pounder that they bring to Arnhem, and the men look after. They fire it twice in 9 days. So it's like, just shouldn't have bothered with it. But the artillery they have, the Allies have been winning the war. The reason Arnhem is happening, the reason the Germans are on the run, is that the Allies have been fighting the war with extremely powerful artillery, like lashings of artillery, like they're smothering the Germans with artillery. Before you put an attack in, you smother the German line with as many guns as you possibly can. Then the Germans counterattack, and while they're counterattacking, you smother them in artillery again. And that's how they've been destroying the German army, defeated the German army in Europe. Infantry still have their part to play, of course, but you've been doing it with firepower. And an airborne division can't take that with them. They can't take the heavy guns, the mediums, even the field gun, the 25-pounder. They've got a much lighter gun, and they can't do the thing that everyone else is doing. And there's one company commander who says, there's no guns on this and we're advancing and it's like a stupid exercise where we're being over optimistic and we don't have the means to suppress the enemy or let alone destroy them when they counterattack. And it's there's a big hole in the middle of what they're able to do tactically because they just don't have the firepower. And it's whenever you read an Arnhem account, it always goes paratroopers, of course, are lightly armed. You think, yeah, they are. What does that actually mean? Why? What does that amount to? What they're able to do actually? Where do we get to with that? And they have enough ammunition, but like if they were to fire all their ammunition in one go, they've 20 minutes of artillery ammunition they bring with them on the first day of indirect fire artillery ammunition. And in Normandy there have been barrages that last whole days, to suppress the Germans, and they just can't do it. They can't do it. So their expectations of what they're going to be able to achieve are I think, are out of whack with the reality of how the Allies have been fighting.
And I guess the weaponry as well that the paratroopers are using, is it majority? It's not majority Stens, is it? It's majority.
No, it's mainly rifles. Yeah, but it's kind of half and half. And lots of people have a Sten as a secondary weapon as well. Although,
right, you'd have a rifle and a Sten.
Yeah. People went really tooled up, and a pistol. I mean, enough people did, right? Yeah, I know, right? But the problem is the number 4 rifle, short magazine Lee Enfield, the 303 rifle, was designed to fight border patrol stuff in the Hindu Kush. That's what that rifle's for. That's why it can drop a man half a mile away. That's the big idea is it can drop a horse at 500 yards. Someone's galloping towards you, and then you haven't got to fight them because they've come off their horse, right? Before they ever get near you. That's what that rifle was originally conceived for. It's mass produced to the point where it's no longer very accurate, actually, because obviously they produce it to the point, mass produced to the point where, or it's not as accurate as it's meant to be, as advertised. The British Army hangs on to it because basically it's simple, and you think you can train people up on it pretty quickly because it's simple, which tells you what the British Army thinks of its infantry. It thinks they're probably not worth spending money on giving something complicated to, right? So that's got to make you wonder. But it's not a good weapon in street fighting. It's good on the defensive, but as a street fighting weapon, because it doesn't deliver the rate of fire. But of course the converse problem of that is if you're an airborne soldier, you've got to make every round count because your amount of ammunition is necessarily finite. There isn't a lorry coming up every evening to unload fresh ammunition for the morning because you're 60 miles behind enemy lines. What you're waiting on is a supply flight to arrive and deliver you more stuff. So they're caught in this double bind with the rifle. The rifle is the wrong weapon for the job in the town, the right weapon for the job in the village. And when they retreat to the village, loads of men have thrown their rifles away and scrounged weapons off. The German automatic weapons are good, and they don't have their rifles anymore. They're using their Sten guns and they've thrown their rifles away. So there's this sort of even on the granular level, the thing the infantryman has got, while they may be state-of-the-art soldiers, their rifles aren't. And the Germans by this point have figured this out. They've got what we would call an assault rifle by this point, which even looks like an AK-47. The Kalashnikov, the paradigmatic assault rifle. Germans have figured this out because they know if you're going to train loads of people, and they know the nature of fighting is that what it's about is dishing out rounds. It's not about shooting people accurately. It's about dishing out rounds and preventing people moving, basically reducing their options as well as trying to kill them. But the Paras turn up with a rifle that's from it's been designed in the 1890s essentially for dealing with people in the Hindu Kush, and you kind of think that's it. That's interesting, isn't it? Why wouldn't that be interesting? What does that tell us about what's really going on? In the way what the army thinks of its soldiers, even its best ones, supposedly.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Well, look, we're running out of time, so I
sorry, I couldn't talk about this.
No, not at all. I'm fascinated by it, but I was just interested. I was thinking about this whilst reading, and we were seeing sort of intense fighting going on in a number of places in the world at the
Yeah, yeah,
moment. I was just wondering
yeah,
about the mental toll on these troops who are 3 days without sleep, I think,
yeah.
on the Tuesday.
By this point, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
Well, I mean, and being in constant peril, living on the sort of expectation that you're going to be relieved, and then of course they haven't been relieved by the Tuesday when they're sort of reasonable expectation that they might be, or they've been led to believe that will happen. Although the old sweats were going, well, Eighth Army were late in Sicily, they're going to be late. This lot are going to be late as well. I actually can't get my head round. The thing is in reading this book and ending it with what will happen tomorrow, which was sort of the comedian's instinct is what's the punchline to this thing, and the punchline was what will happen tomorrow is the idea, because they didn't know, but what happens tomorrow is after this day when absolutely literally everything could possibly go wrong goes wrong, they then dust themselves down and resist and hang on for another 6 days. And that in a way is the thing I sort of want people to get to the end of the book and go, well, surely I'd give up. Who are these? I mean, who are these fucking people? Is the thing I come away. How on earth did they do this? What resources did these people possess to be able to keep going? And that's that really the mental strain of it all, and it is incomprehensible. And there's a moment in the fighting in the town in the South Staffords, the 2nd Battalion South Staffords, where Robert Kane, who wins a VC, is decorated with the VC after, and he's the only VC winner from Arnhem of the 5 who survives the battle. He comes across his battalion commander who's trying to figure out what to do, and he says, I looked at him and I knew he was done. I knew, and he really loves his battalion commander. He loves Bacard. He goes, I could see he was finished. He got nothing left in him, right? And in the withdrawal from the town, there's a moment where the commander of Royal Artillery of the light regiment in the bottom of the village at Oosterbeek, where the guns are, goes forward. A man called Sheriff Thompson goes forward and stops the flood of men fleeing, and he meets Robert Kane amongst this flood of men fleeing, and says in his account, he was nothing like you'd never have imagined on meeting him then that this was a future VC winner. So Kane has his moment where he's lost it completely, and then goes on to be one of the most, revered, gallant, brilliantly brave, incredibly and very lucky soldiers in the history of the British Army, and that makes him more human. He has this moment where he is grabbed by fear and held by fear and has to say to himself, no, I'm going to hang on. And that's really the mental strain I think is incomprehensible to I've never been in anything faintly resembling any of this. And like I say, the end of the book, you think, well, how is there 6 more days of them hanging on? I don't understand it. And I don't mind reading history or studying history and coming away thinking, well, I can't get my head around that. That's the lesson of history sometimes. It's like, who were these people? What the hell were they thinking? What were they doing?
Indeed. Well, that's a perfect way to end it, I think, Al.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great. Wonderful book. So
Thank
listeners, you know what to do.
It's the perfect gift for anyone you know.
Indeed. Thanks, Al.
My pleasure. Thanks very much, Oliver.